the concepts are so simple. Don't attack people. Like, you get to run your life, you don't get to run other people's lives.
And that's what really clicked with me, is like noticing how you don't really have to talk about, all the horrors and evil and even the conspiracy, even though that does have some value and merit. It's really about, like bringing out the inner humanity in people and showing how these concepts are really simple, and people already know it and they just don't they fully cognize there. It's like the heart understands, but what's going on here is like there's something in there that's fucking with them.
Yeah, and there's totally a conflict, and they've been trained into that conflict. And most of what we teach in Candles in the Dark is about knowing the things to not bring up, because it'll set off the other person's psychology and make them incapable of thinking about it. And sometimes even people will even say, well, most people aren't smart enough to understand this. This is so painfully simple.
It's ridiculously simple.
Yeah, a turtle could understand this. The problem is not that the issue is complex or the principles are complex. Is that they were taught a lie that messes with their ability to understand what should be obvious. And in talking to people, there's so many things that takes the conversation in the wrong direction, and then it just turns into bickering and arguing and people getting emotional.
Yeah.
And that's why the whole focus of Candles in the Dark is on psychology, your own psychology and theirs, because, and this is true of how people communicate in general. Most people, when they communicate, they're not communicating. They're two people, if they disagree on something, they're just crashing into a brick wall.
Yeah.
Neither of them hears the other one. Neither is even trying to empathize or understand what the other one's saying. And it's really frustrating to see, basically, like anarchist and voluntarists talking to a statist, and I'm there observing. I was like, I know what you meant when you said that, and I know what it sounds like to the person who believes in government. He had no idea what you meant. And then he responds with like, I know what he thinks he meant, and I know you're missing it. So it really is two people speaking a different language and accomplishing nothing. Because if you don't find a way to speak their language, and I don't mean the words, I mean the thought patterns and the concepts that most people have never thought of, if you don't have a way to connect with what they already believe in and what they already care about, you might as well just be preaching at a wall.
Exactly, yeah.
And, for myself and all the anarchists I know, we have plenty of experience of feeling like, that was really simple and I explained it, and how did your brain take it on these weird tangents? Because we sort of expect that, hey, if you explain the evidence and logic, isn't that all you need? And nope, it isn't.
I learned that the hard way for the past 5 years.
Me too, for the past 20.
Yeah, for the past 20 years.
Right, that's not how the human brain works. Like, we imagine ourselves to be all rational and advanced and progressive and intelligent, and we're not. We're these weird, emotional, irrational things whose beliefs and actions and words come mostly from this discombobulated pile of weird wiring in our brain that we don't control. And the bad news for anarchists is, if you want to be able to get through to somebody else's psychology, you have to start with your own.
That's right.
You have to learn how to control your own psychology, so you're not accidentally doing all the things which set them off and make them defensive and combative, which is, the vast majority of conversations that I've seen and that I've been in with statists. Like, I only know this stuff from having done it wrong thousands of times, and eventually starting to see patterns in, why does this always lead to that? Oh, okay, now I'm starting to get what their brain did. Like, I was clear in my brain with what I was trying to say, and somewhere between that and what they heard, there was a huge disconnect, and figuring out that's their psychology and my psychology. Because of the way I come across, the way I explained it, if I'm in evangelical mode, as I refer to it, it's like, I'm going to talk you into what you should believe. Nobody responds to that well.
Control freak mode, like, it's like the I know something you don't know.
Exactly.
And it's such a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, and they immediately put up a wall and run away.
Yeah.
And so it's 1% philosophy, really simple stuff that's so simple it's sort of silly to call it philosophy.
Yeah, and I love that you pointed out, because most people already are this. I mean, most people's daily life, as you pointed out, they don't go around hurting people and trying to steal from others.
Yeah.
It's maybe a couple, but like most people, no, that's not how most people act.
Yeah.
It's just this mythology and all this weird garbage that has gotten in the way, especially too when you hear it so much from people. When you hear, like, when you're growing up and you go to school and you hear from just about everyone you can think of, it's like, why would you not believe it?
Yeah. You have no no reason to doubt it, because if you have mythology totally surrounding you constantly before you can even talk, you have to have a really big reason to question it. It's like, well, everybody knows this. Why would you ever back up and go, well, what if that isn't true? What if it isn't true that 1 + 1 = 2? Well, you're insane to even think that.
Yeah.
And they feel that way about government and law. Well, of course we need government and laws and political authority and elections, and democracy is good and the Constitution is great and blah, 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 because everybody around me says that.
Yeah.
And it's only by using the sort of gentle passive technique of knowing what questions to ask to bring them to the fact that already conflicts with what they already are and what they already believe.
Yeah.
And that's the key, is instead of having the attitude of, I have my beliefs and I'm going to smash them into your head, it's figuring out that they already have inside them all the virtue they need, all the understanding they need, but there's also a lie mixed in there.
Yeah.
And they're the only ones who can sort it out. You can try to help them see it, try to help them along with it, but they get to make that decision. You don't. And all you can do is gently go, see that? So I say there is absolutely a fight, but you're not supposed to be in on it. It's not you, it's them versus them.
It's them, exactly. Yeah. It's like you're guiding them through the whole thing,
Yeah, well, you're being a cheerleader for the real them.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm on the side of the real you, your real values, your real priority, your real conscience. I agree with that. That's what I want to win in this conflict. But first you have to show them that the conflict isn't this, it's that. It's in their own head.
And it's also important to keep in mind, especially too, like, they don't really believe it because they genuinely want to do harm, even though you can clearly hear the words you're saying, like, it clearly equates to doing harm. They don't think it's really doing harm. So it's important to keep that in mind. Once they really do see it's harm, they're going to filter that out, and it's really important. It kind of reminds me a lot too what you wrote and How to Be a Successful Tyrant when you were talking about the Milgram experience. How most people, they know evil when they see it.
Yeah,
exactly. But when you have that lie in the way, that's like pounding them. No, it's legitimate. Like if that goes away, they're not going to do the harm.
Right.
That's most of humanity.
Yeah, they don't.
People are already good people.
People don't run off and have wars for the fun of it. They run off and have wars because they've been taught to bow to authority, and authority says, go run off and have a war.
Yeah, exactly.
And, same thing with tax collectors. How many people do that on their own? And cops that lock people up for having the wrong plan. Yeah. And they'll even talk as if, I'm not doing this. I don't make the law. They'll be apologetic sometimes. Like, I don't make the laws, but you broke the law, so I'm going to kidnap you in the name of this weird thing called the law. Even though I totally wouldn't do it on my own.
Yeah.
Like, if not for the politician scribbles telling me to.
Just like in the Milgram experiments when they were just like twitching and like sweating, like, and how they didn't want to keep doing it.
Right.
They kept doing it because of that lie in their head.
Yeah, they've been taught to believe that obedience is a virtue, and it makes them like profoundly psychologically uncomfortable with disobeying what they know is an immoral order.
Yeah.
That's how strong the belief is, that even when they know it's wrong, that indoctrination wins out, and they'll do what they know is wrong because they've been so taught to obey authority, obey authority, obey authority, obey authority. It's in the schools, it's in what most parents teach, it's in everywhere in society. It's obviously something the government pushes everywhere. And that has nothing to do with reason and logic. That is just animal training.
Yeah.
You got hit over the nose with a newspaper every time you disobeyed, and you got given a treat every time you obeyed. Over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And now people they imagine themselves to be like rational, educated, enlightened beings, and they're just trained dogs.
Yeah.
And you can see it when an authority comes along and says, do this, do that. Oh, yes, sir. Hurt that person. Do I have to? Yes. Okay, hurt. And they imagine themselves to be much more free than they are. They're mentally enslaved and they don't even notice.
Yeah.
And the challenge is to get them to see that not only are they mentally enslaved, they're helping to enslave others, mentally and physically. But if you get them to see that that's not what they really are, that's not what they really want, it's not what they really believe in, that was a lie they were taught, then there's some hope. And because that's true of most people, and it's hard to remember it sometimes. It's hard to keep in mind, like you're talking to some devout statist who's, pontificating about how he's all in favor of the war on drugs or the military blowing up people on the other side of the world. And it can be difficult to remember underneath all that twisted perception and mythology are good intentions.
Yeah, he's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
He's being tricked.
Yeah.
What he really wants.
His view of the right thing is totally demented and mangled, but there are still good intentions underneath. And the thing is, if you're talking to someone as if he's the enemy, as if you're a bad guy, you have zero chance of changing his mind on anything. And as soon as he perceives that you think it's a you versus him scenario, as soon as he sees that you view him as an enemy, neither of you is going to get anywhere. Because he's going to go, no, I'm right. I'm cheering for what's good, therefore you're cheering for what's evil. And it doesn't get anywhere. You have to, if you can't find some good in him that you're trying to talk to and bring out of him by way of the questions that we teach in Candles in the Dark, it's a waste of time. If someone's genuinely evil, don't try to talk a serial killer into being a nice guy, it doesn't frickin' work.
Right.
And if you can't find the good in them and talk to that to bring them out of the lie, you're not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah, because the difference between the psycho and the good person is the psycho. He knows what he's doing is bad. The difference is he doesn't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care.
Care.
Yeah, and if you meet somebody who all the way doesn't care that they're advocating violence, just leave them alone. Go talk to somebody else. Because most people who believe in government aren't that. They're doing it because they think it's good. And that's what's so creepy. And I talked about that a little bit in my talk. That the tyrants use people's goodness to commit the evil they commit. The political left, it's like, you care about the poor and the sick and the elderly, give us power and we'll take care of them. And by power, I mean we get to violently rob 100 million people. And then on the right side, it's, well, you don't want the innocent victimized by criminals or scary foreigners or invaders or whatever. So give us power and money, and we'll protect you. So they always appeal to the goodness in people to empower their evil. That's been the truth. That's been the case with every nasty regime in history. Is they were empowered by the well-intentioned, law-abiding taxpayers who thought they were doing the right thing. And so we have to show them, no, obedience isn't the right thing. That isn't what makes you good. And being a law-abiding taxpayer is the way to empower the nastiest people in the world. Whereas abiding by your own conscience, figuring out right and wrong and acting accordingly, that is what the world needs. And that includes disobeying the law, disobeying every authority that tells you to go against your conscience.
Yeah.
No matter what's going on, no matter where you are, no matter where the location or the situation or anything else, you abide by your conscience, and everybody has been trained not to do that. They've been trained that your conscience isn't good enough. You can't be trusted. Never mind your judgment.
Yeah.
You will do as you're told. And that's what school teaches. You don't get to decide what you're thinking about, what you're talking about, what you're doing, where you're going to be. We will teach you over and over again. You will do what we tell you to do.
Yep.
You will talk about what we tell you to talk about. You will care about what we tell you to care about. And over and over and over again until people get to the point where they really and truly believe that obeying an outside authority is what makes them good. And that's the ultimate sin. The ultimate blasphemy is the notion that a human being should shut down his own conscience and instead obey some outside imaginary authority.
Yeah.
And that's what has to be changed. We have to free all the people from that lie and get them to say, no, your conscience, your judgment, your moral code, as it already was, is what you should be obeying and complying with, not some dictates of some ruling class or authority or anything like that.
I think a lot of people justify it in their own mind that it's for the greater good. So how do you help people see that that's just not a good way of looking at it?
Well, a lot of it has to do with keeping it, like I say in Candles in the Dark, literal, specific, and personal. Like, they like to talk about, well, I think we should have a policy against drugs because I think drugs are bad. Well, what does a policy against drugs mean? Like, let's make this into a real-world example. If I decided to have a plant in my backyard that the politicians say I'm not allowed to, what do you want to have happen to me? Do you want men with guns to come and drag me away and put me in a cage? And suddenly they get uncomfortable. They're okay with saying, well, I think drug addiction is a problem, so I'm sort of against it, so I support the war on drugs. As long as it's vague euphemisms, they feel okay about it. But when you bring out the actual literal violence underneath that, then they start to get fidgety and uncomfortable because they're like, I don't want to say that I want you kidnapped for having a plant or for not paying tribute to the ruling class or for not obeying some other stupid thing. So to make it, basically you have to take it out of the realm of the euphemisms and mythology and make it be literal and make them uncomfortable about the immoral violence that they condone when they're sold it as something necessary and righteous and helpful for the common good or whatever else, whatever other excuse that people are using. Yeehaw.
Yeah, it definitely is a trained thing, especially because, you know, think about when you're a child too, when you're very little, you get all excited, you're curious about stuff. Think about how, like, that is the antithesis too of the belief in authority.
Yeah.
Belief in authority is like saying, okay, we have it all figured out and we're just going to force everyone to this box.
Right.
Like, we're just going to force everyone to this box, and whatever's outside that box is the loot.
Right.
And, like, yeah, and it's totally insane, because that's not how we think at all.
We'll feed you what you need to know and everything you need to know. You don't need to think about anything else or focus on anything else. And to be trained in that year after year, it can't not have an effect. It can't not make people into these weird trained dogs who don't have control of their own brains.
Yeah.
And that's when you can have war and nastiness and oppression after you've trained people to be obedient subjects instead of people.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. They're trying to make people into animals, into livestock, instead of these things that have free will and judgment and a moral conscience that can figure out it's not okay to do this to other people. And just because somebody with a badge tells me to, or just because somebody with a badge is doing it, that doesn't make it okay.
Yeah.
And that's all that needs to change. Yep. That thing is all that needs to change.
And it's funny how, you know, the state is really the great distorter of reality. One of the things that they do is they train children. They disguise reality with euphemisms, and they fog things up by distorting language. You know, and that's why we have the realm of politics, right? And politics is simply the exercise of euphemism to disguise reality.
Yeah.
And then they convince you that intelligence is the ability to understand complexities and nuance, when all it is the ability to be able to dance around in their distorted fog the way they want you to.
Yeah.
And real intelligence is about seeing the truth, which is very, very simple when you actually
a lot of the
find
time.
it.
Yeah.
And so everything that they do, the evil genius of what they do is, here's the fundamental layer of reality that most people will get if they're not really tampered with, and if they're just properly guided. And they just take that and they add layer on layer on layer of language distortions, and then they give you a gold star when you can repeat all this complex, weird linguistic distortion stuff. And then they tell you you're smart for being able to have piles of word salads.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on patents. Do they help the little guy, protect the little guy from the big guys, or is it ridiculous?
I don't care who they help. To me, is whether it's moral to initiate violence. And so, for example, in my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, I say, it has the copyright sign, and it says, I copyright this just so nobody else can copyright it and stop me from publishing it. But when it comes down to it, I don't think I have any moral right to use violence against somebody for copying this. I hope they won't. I hope they'll buy my stuff. And so to me, the practical argument of, well, there's less of an incentive to invent stuff, that's true, but, I mean, or at least it can be true, but that doesn't make it okay. It's sort of like, you know,
if I own the ideas, you ultimately don't.
Yeah, and again, if you do simple examples, you can see how weird it is. Like if somebody's stuck driving in the snow and like, I don't know how to get out. Well, here's a little trick. You wedge this thing under your tire and you very slowly do that. Oh, cool. But by the way, you're not allowed to ever use that unless you give me $10 each time. It's like, wait a minute. Now I have it I have the idea in my head. It can't still be yours. And you can't tell me I'm not allowed to do something that I now know how to do. And that sort of shows the weirdness of patents. Is, oh, I get that, how that machine works. That's really cool. Well, you're not allowed to make one because that was my idea, and you weren't the original person to come up with it.
It's one thing to steal somebody's actual thing they already produced and spent time to produce. I'll think of it this way, if you make a copy of something, that's one thing. If you physically take, like, if you have physical books and they're in your house and somebody takes your books,
right?
That's
then
that.
They're taking a thing. They're stealing stuff.
But if they read your book online and then they typed up their own copy of it,
yeah, that's not aggression against me, so it doesn't justify force against them.
Right. And the thing is I think a lot of people I think there are people who want to, it comes down to having the mentality that you can force people or that it's good to force anybody to be very perfect and good. The thing is, there's a whole spectrum of things that absolutely are asshole things to do, but they don't justify violence, and they don't justify initiating aggression. It's like somebody can say some nasty words at me. That doesn't mean I get to go lob their head off.
Right.
So somebody can be an asshole. Like if I make a product and my neighbor realizes I made a product and he fine-tunes the idea way faster than me without telling me he did that, and he goes and sells it to the community before I can. That's an asshole move, but I don't get to go attack him and steal his stuff and kill him over it. It's an asshole move. And there get to be assholes in the free world.
Yeah, and the problem is that the belief, it's a perfect illustration of why the belief in authority is the entire problem, because if you believe the government has a right to regulate and outlaw and do all that, then whenever there's something like this, well, that's sort of unfair that this happens. Like, it's sort of unfair that this person has so much money and this person has so little. It's sort of unfair that this person, came up with an invention and somebody else is using it without, like, if you just look at that as a free human being, you just go, well, that's unfair, and maybe you'll like help out the guy who's worse off because of it. But if there's authority, and if you believe there's authority and think government has the right to use force, then every time you see anything unfair, you're running off to government and saying, hey, government, please use violence to do this. So a copyright is violence. Yep. And, it's, well, we're going to go to court, we're going to sue you, and if in the end we decide that you didn't have the copyright, it's men with guns are going to take you or your property away unless you stop doing it.
And that grows it. If more people believe in that, then that grows it. And then ultimately, then the government, because people clamor for laws or clamor for this mass control, then that inevitably will squash the little guy, and it has. And so now copyright laws have actually become the thing that squashes the little guy, because now the government can, spy on somebody and know they have a good idea, and magically somebody's idea that they told no one, but they maybe told a friend online, and it's really unique and weird, springs up somewhere, and there's a government patent on it, and it has millions of dollars behind it already, and they have a weird feeling that, I feel like maybe that was taken from me, and they can't prove it, and the government can just easily do that stuff now, and it happens. They really do that. They look for things to take from the people. They'll spy, and if they find good ideas, they'll go take it and run with it.
And will then use violence to stop anybody else from doing it.
The person who originally might have come up with the idea, or anybody else who had a similar idea.
And that's that's how it always goes, is people want authoritarian power to make things fair, make things even, make things whatever, stop people from being annoying, like stop people from being racist. We need a law that says you're not allowed to discriminate against somebody based on race. And that turns into government violence, and it turns into a bigger problem than there was before that. So people being jerks and sort of selfish and whatever else, yeah, that's a problem. But compared to authoritarian violence and war, it's not really that big a problem.
The thing is and government exacerbates the problem.
Yeah.
Because as soon as there's this giant big stick I can beat you with, and I can absolve accountability for my own actions, I don't have to go face my neighbor and try to work things out and talk to him. I can just go, I don't like his music, it's too loud, I'm calling the cops. And as soon as anybody can do that, that's going to exacerbate the tendency of people to be assholes. When nobody can clamor for anything because they don't have something to clamor for to use as a stake, and they have to back their own wishes or their own desires with their own action and be willing to do that, they're going to actually more carefully consider their actions.
This is actually a perfect another example of the contradiction in people's minds, because most people say, like, don't resort to violence, settle things peacefully. Violence is never the answer. 911, my neighbor is playing. That's violence, and they don't even notice. When you call the cops on somebody, it's absolutely always violence. Now, every once in a while, violence is justified. If somebody's attacking you with an axe, although if you call the cops, you might as well order a pizza, it'll get there faster.
True.
But when people go to government and whine for this or that legislation or policy, they are whining for violence, and they don't even notice because of their authoritarian indoctrination. And again, it shows the contradiction, because in their day-to-day lives, they wouldn't do that. Well, I have sort of a disagreement about how to do something, so I'm going to pull out a gun and make you do it the way I want you to. Like, I don't like your habits, or I want you to pay for my kids' schooling. But
like, they don't go to their boss and like, you know, oh, we're putting together a potluck at work for everyone. I don't like that dish you're bringing.
Right.
Like, nobody does that. Like,
but they'll ask for regulations and laws to do exactly that. And government is the thing that pits us at war with each other constantly, because people don't feel bad about doing it because they don't view it as violence.
That's a really good answer. That's actually the best answer I've heard. So basically, even though it might stifle a little bit of like some of the incentive to create things, it's just something that we'll have to deal with in a free society.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is we can always come up with a better solution than a monopoly on force will come up with. So we can figure out how to disincentivize. We can figure. I mean, the blockchain is a great example of how to disincentivize assholes. I mean, look at Steemit and the Steemit community. That is a great example of disincentivizing trolls and non-producing, non-value-adding assholes. You don't get the same dickish comments on the platform like Steemit
as you do on YouTube,
Facebook.
Right.
You know, and so when there's a free market and people can create solutions to these problems, it opens up things. And so assholes actually don't get that far in a free market, because the free market tends to expose them pretty quickly.
Yeah, and they're also the ones who gravitate towards both political, positions of political power and those who want to influence it. They're the first in line to run to government to try to force their will and their preferences on the rest of the world. And, whether your intentions are good intentions or bad intentions, running off to government to have a violent solution doesn't make society better. So, and now I'm starving, so we should go eat.
That was awesome. Yeah.
That's a good way to end that.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure that out, and I've heard other people talk about it before, and I'm just like, I don't know. But I see, like, your whole thing is just write down the morals, and then figure it out after that. But if we can't do it, we can't. We can't build a society if we're using the government to enforce things.
Right, and allowing freedom sometimes means you don't get what you want. Like the example I was using earlier is if all my neighbors decide to sell to people who speak a different language and have a different culture, it'll be sort of uncomfortable for me if I can't even speak the same language as my neighbors, and that would sort of suck. But I have no right to tell them, you're not going to sell to, like, it's not my house, it's your house, you can sell it to who you want,
and you have
whether I benefit or not.
And you have the choice to keep living there.
Right,
and I might move. Freedom comes with risk, it comes with potential discomfort, it comes with adaptation, and you have to be willing to adapt. So whatever you believe your path is, you have to be prepared for when your boundaries of your human freedom meet up with others. And if it's like freedom of association is part of that, but that means you have to make choices. And so when people want this easy solution where they don't want the responsibility for having to choose their path and figure out what they have to do and adapting, they just want somebody else to use force to make everything exactly how they want it. And that's the giant trap. That's exactly how you feed the nastiest people.
I believe everyone should have the freedom to make choices that serve me. What you actually need is, I believe everyone gets to run their own life, even if it doesn't go along with my interests and my preferences, and as long as they're not aggressing against me, I have to put up with whatever the end result is of other people being free too, if I have any right to claim freedom for myself.
Yep. Very cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.